Deputy President. Somewhere in Australia today, a child woke up, put on fresh clothes and sat down to a breakfast because of a cashless debit card. Somewhere in Australia this afternoon, a wife or partner won't be trembling in fear of a man coming home, grogged up and ready to fight because of the cashless debit card. And somewhere in Australia tonight, some elderly people will sleep soundly, knowing they were unlikely to be robbed or rolled for cash because of the cashless debit card. And today, we're being asked to vote to take that away from them. Mr Deputy President, I must believe that we as a chamber are better than that, and I have to believe that I as a person am better than that. Today, I'd like to talk about two things. How did we come to the point that this chamber, filled with people that care about Australia and Australians, are about to throw some vulnerable people to the wolves? And what are the realities of dealing with these displaced communities? In looking for why people do things, I always look at the motive behind the actions. In this case, maybe contrary to some others, I get that those opposite took this policy to the election. I understand it, and I respect that they are trying to meet those undertakings they made. I also get at the time, without all the information, they may have felt that the card was inequitable. I can see where that might have come from. But I also understand that whilst you can't expect people to change their minds, you can ask them to make a new decision with new information. And, as brief as the inquiry was, it came up with the new information, and this process must at a minimum be paused. I won't be going into the stats that many trotted out or the quotes of Noel Pearson that I've probably heard about 20 times in defence of the card here today. But I want those opposite to go and just read some of the powerful testimonies of those directly affected. Not the agencies, not the industries, and not the vested interests, but the people. Imagine their faces when they are talking about the better life they've had without fear. Imagine the hope that they have had for life with less crime and better health. And imagine those same faces when we are telling them we're going to take that away. I accept that this was not the intention of this legislation when it was first considered. I can see the care that all in this chamber have for the people that this affects. But that is why I ask, if a couple of weeks in an inquiry can point out these issues, why don't we take a couple of months to try and find a better way to fix it? Mr Deputy Chair, why does this have to happen this way? Why does this have to happen on this day? I know by the proposed amendments that have been introduced that there is an acceptance that perhaps from the other side this is not as cut and dry as first thought. I can see by the looks on some of the faces opposite that even with them, it's something that still sits uneasy because of some unexpected consequences. What happens if that child can't go to school because we pass this? What happens if those elders get robbed because we pass this? What happens if that lady gets bashed or worse because we pass this? We need to get this right, and I accept that there are some flaws in the cashless debit card. It is not perfect, and it can be improved. But I also know that this legislation and the rushed amendments are not the way to do it. Let's take the time and do this properly. These displaced communities suffer from the double barrel of disadvantage: cultural displacement and geographical distance. It is not hard to see that if I were located miles from anywhere, with little hope of employment or distraction, that I'd probably hit the cans and have a punt. To what end, I don't know. Throw on top of that an Indigenous communities for their displacement from culture and generational neglect, and it only gets worse. These things are not fixed by taking away something that at least had some impact. These things are not fixed by tokens or platitudes. We have said sorry. We have closed the gap. We are trying to find a voice. But all the time, the problems just get worse. Mr Deputy Speaker, today I spoke to Mr Mark Lockyer, and I tell this story of his family with his permission. Just 2 months ago, his niece, Alina Kukla, and his son Orlando were shot in an apparent murder-suicide at 16 Mile Camp near Alice Springs. The apparent perpetrator, the toddler's father, had a history of violence of women and had been drinking earlier all day with the victim. As bad as all that is, the only witness was Mr. Kukla's older son, Miss Kukla's older son, at all of 3 years old. After seeing that and losing his mother, he can add another couple of barrels to the challenge that will face him in his life. But where was the national outrage for this? Where was the media coverage of this horrible crime? It was nowhere, because it is too difficult for us to face that, despite all our best intentions and billions of dollars spent over a decade, that this problem still exists. And in the absence of answers, we give silence and throw more guilt cash at the community so we can pretend we are making a difference. But let's face it, we are not. We are asked to do that again today, with another $50 million being allocated as part of an amendment that acknowledges there will be increased crime and there will be increased alcoholism because of this bill. A coroner's report has found that 65 Aboriginal women have been killed by their partners just in the Northern Territory since 2000. And we hear nothing and do nothing. Justice Judith Kelly noted that whilst everyone is willing to talk about the overrepresentation of Aboriginal men in prison, but, as I've said before, and I quote, "The stream of Aboriginal men going to prison is matched by a steady stream, a river, of Aboriginal women going into the hospital and the morgue." During a 2016 episode of Q&A, Professor Marsha Langdon said domestic violence suffered by Aboriginal women range from between 34 times national average and up to 80 at the worst. This was later checked by ABC Fact Check and found to be broadly true. The problems facing these regional Aboriginal communities is real and monstrous. They are very different to the problems faced by similar communities in the cities. They are harder to see and harder to solve. The withdrawal of this card will be the second blow to many of these communities after the revocation of the alcohol ban by the Northern Territory. Alina, Kukla and Orlando deserve better than that. That is why I cannot support this bill, even with the amendments. And that, Deputy President, is why I ask again, delay the bill, enlarge the inquiry and come back to this place with legislation that is designed to make a difference, not tick a box. Thank you.